Hi, good day. Are you one of those interested or want to learn more about baking? Baking can help bring back memories, stimulate the senses, improve appetite, which can encourage a better relationship with food, and it's great for keeping the brain active, as it involves weighing and measuring. We know that in baking there is a lot to process. It's not just a matter of simply putting the mixture in the oven. There are terms that you need to know first. So let us show and present to you some of the baking terms.
So what is alternately add? It is a way that involves two things happening or existing one of the other repeatedly. And the alternately add in baking are the process of adding the liquid and dry ingredients. Alternately add to the batter, which help to reduce the amount of mixing needed so that it can make smooth batter. Alternately add is very important in baking because the longer the flour is mixed with liquid, the more structural gluten is developed. And also, for example, liquid ingredients. In liquid ingredients, it should always be mixed separately before they've been added to the dry ingredients. And mixing the dry ingredients by themselves means you will eventually disperse the raising agents, spices, sugar, etc. throughout, which is important for an even batter. In batter, it is a mixture of dry liquid ingredients such as egg, flour, and milk or water. It is similar to dough but it has a thinner consistency and it cannot be kneaded. We need to mix batter properly because if we cannot mix it properly, it can cause over-mixing batters and dough, and it will be toughened and strengthened to gluten in the flour. Doing this to the gluten, it will yield you tougher baked goods, not a light and tender bake like you want. The batter with higher proportions of liquids are thinner than those, and it can be stirred, poured, and dropped from the spoon, so that baked goods made with the batter are mainly shaped by the containers in which they are baked, and it includes biscuits, muffins, cornbread, layers cakes, and many more.
So what is caramelize? It is a process of cooking sugar until it turns brown. Caramelization happens when sugar is introduced to heat. So when sugar is heated to high temperatures, it undergoes chemical changes and breaks down as a result of forming a new chemical which are released that alter the flavor, and the color of the sugar will be darkened. So when sugar caramelizes, they develop nuttiness, bitterness, toastiness, and a bit of buttery creaminess. There are things you need to keep in mind when you are caramelizing. It can only happen in dry heat, which means you can do it while steaming, blanching, or boiling. It is important in baking because it contributes to the flavor and color. That is why caramel can be used as a filling, topping, or as a glaze. So next is cream. Creaming is the process of mixing butter and sugar together on a moderately high speed until well blended, fluffy, and pale yellow. It's used to smooth the mixture before adding other ingredients. This is most often used to make cake batters, cookie, and bread doughs. In making use of the cream techniques is to let your butter reach room temperature before starting. If the butter is too cold, it will make mixing it with the sugar more difficult and uneven. When you are ready to cream, start mixing the butter first. This way, when the sugar is added, it has something to stick to and doesn't spin out of the bowl. Creaming butter helps blend sugar evenly, thus ensuring a creamy and a gritty texture. Cream butter also holds air and helps bake good rice.
Using a technique called cutting, a fat-like butter is mixed with a dry component, usually flour, but small lumps or bits of the fat remain intact in the mixture. Basically, this involves coating fat particles with a dry substance. The components must not be overly mixed because the resulting paste will end in a poor final product. So, it is important to keep in mind. When later combined with a liquid such as water or milk, the gluten proteins in the flour are less likely to become gluten as a product of cutting in. As a result, The main product structure becomes separated, giving the pastry a flaky consistency. So, on how to cut in, first is to make sure the butter is cold. I'm talking straight from the fridge cold. Then, cut the butter into small pieces and then toast them separately into the flour, making sure each gets covered in flour before you start cutting. If you do not have a pastry blender in your baking supplies, you can simply use 2 knives, holding one in each hand and cutting across the fat in opposite directions, working it into the flour. We have the dredge. In dredging, food is lightly dusted in a mixture of flour and other dry materials. This consistent, thin layer of flour coating helps food brown while preventing it from sticking to the pan. Additionally, it acts as a barrier between the heat and the food to prevent drying out. The food is kept from getting rough as a result. The majority of food items have some wetness in them, which is necessary for dredging in flour. Here's on how you dredge. Spread the coating in a shallow dish, such as a pie plate. Roll the food around in the coating or mixture of flour until the food is coated in all sides. Shake off the excess.
Drizzle. It refers to the process of pouring a very fine stream of liquid, such as melted butter or a sugar glaze over food for decorative purposes and or to add flavor. As another example, chocolate syrup is commonly drizzled over ice cream or cake to improve the appearance as well as to add flavor. Therefore, if you drizzle a liquid over food or drizzle food with a liquid, you pour a small quantity of the liquid all over the food. Dust refers to the process of lightly sprinkling a fine layer of a powdered or granulated ingredient into food. For example, a cake may be dusted with sugar, powdered sugar, or spices as a final decoration or to add flavor. Dust can also refer to the process of dusting a pan with flour in preparation for baking. Furthermore, dusting is a technique of using powdery substances such as flour, icing, or powdered sugar or other powders to lightly cover surface, pans, or food. Flour is sprinkled over counter or surface before turning the dough in for kneading to prevent them from sticking.
Egg wash. An egg wash is beaten egg, sometimes remixed with another liquid such as water or milk, which is sometimes brushed onto the surface of a pastry before baking. Egg washes are also used as a step in the process of breeding foods, providing a substrate for the breeding to stick to. Folding. In cooking and baking, folding refers to the process of combining a light mixture into a heavier mixture while retaining as much of the air as possible. Usually, you will see recipes that call for folding something like meringue or whipped cream into another mixture.
A glaze is a sauce that is cooked onto a protein or vegetable so that the sugars caramelize, get slightly sticky, and adhere to whatever it is that you are cooking. Glazes are used to give desserts a smooth or shiny finish. A glaze is usually drizzled onto a cake or applied with a pastry brush to give a glisten to pastries. Glazes also add a glass-lined look to fruit pies and tarts. How we do glaze. In a bowl, whisk together sifted powdered sugar, vanilla extract, and enough liquid to thin the glaze to your desired consistency for dipping, drizzling, or pouring over your favorite baked goods and pastries.
Where those grease came from. Grease is the common term for animal fats and vegetable oils. It can be found in such items as seasoning, food scraps, baked goods, baking oil, butter and margarine, meat fats, sauces, dairy products, and lard. So in baking, greasing is meant to help you remove the baked goods without it stirring, breaking or prevent the food from sticking, such as greasing a pan. On how to grease, we can use cold or lightly softened butter or seasoning to coat the pan with evenly. Grease the bottom and sides of the pan with the use of brush or paper towel. You only need a thin layer, so don't overdo it.
What does it mean to grease and flour? This is an important step in the baking process to ensure that the finished product doesn't stick to the sides of the pan. Coating a greased cake pan with a thin dusting of flour creates a barrier between the grease and the cake batter, which prevents the grease from melting and disappearing into the batter as the cake bakes, allowing it to do its job in the end after the cake is baked. The flour and grease will provide a non-stick layer so that your baked good does not stick to your pan. Now, here is how you grease and flour. First is to grease the clean pan, then add some flour. Flour the bottom, flour the sides, then you're done. You can now add your butter.
Grease and line. What does it mean to grease and line a pan? The greasing and lining the pan is to prevent sticking. That's why you don't need grease the sides of the pan. If you want it to rise more, the butter grips the side as it rises, but always either grease and line the bottom unless making of an angel food cake. Now, I'll teach you on how to grease and line. Draw around the base of the tin, depends on the shape of the tin, using a pencil on a sheet of greaseproof paper. Cut inside this line, using slightly so that it fits neatly into the base of the tin. Use a pastry brush and brush a small amount of butter or oil around the sides of the tin, or you can use a piece of clean kitchen towel to put butter or oil before fitting the circle of the paper into the greased tin.
Let rise. There are several aspects to bread making that warrant your full attention. You will want to knead out the dough, and you will want to use the right amount of flour. And you will need to make sure that you allow the bread to rise properly. So why does bread rises, and why do we need to let the dough rise? It's because yeast eats sugar and bumps carbon dioxide, which get trapped by the bread's gluten. The more sugar your yeast eats, the more gas that gets formed, and the higher the bread rises. So keep in mind that to let the dough rise, we need to use an active yeast. To put things simply, when you do not allow your bread to rise, it is going to be dense and less flavorful, and it will be more kin to a cake than anything else, given that it will be just dough and not the plethora of air bubbles that make bread into the fluffy loaves that everyone knows and loves. Remember, the best place to let dough rise is a very warm place.
What is pipe out? Pipe out is to squeeze a pastry bag in order to force frosting or other paste like mixtures through the tip of the bag for the purpose of decorating or creating special shapes.
We have what is known as a pastry bag, also known as a piping bag. It's a handheld, frequently cone or triangle-shaped bag made of various flexible and food-safe materials that is used to squeeze semi-solid food through a small aperture at one end, either with or without a piping tip. It is used for a variety of things, including decorating cakes. A wider opening at the opposite end is used to fill it. It is then rolled or twisted shut, and its contents are extruded by applying pressure. As we know, piping is a way of applying or shaping a preparation with a forcing or piping bag. It is the best way to distribute a mixture evenly and form regular shapes as it emerges from the nozzles.
What is pre-bake? Pre-bake is to bake something in advance. Why do we need to pre-bake? Pre-baking is to ensure that the final product doesn't end up soggy. Pre-baking also prevents you from ending up with undercooked shells or undercooked fillings. For no-bake pie recipes, you definitely need pre-bake or else you'll end up with an all-around goopy bite.
What is preheating? The act of turning your oven on and letting it heat up to the right temperature is referred to as preheating. This process is extremely important since you are setting up your oven for a successful session of baking by making sure the walls and all the air in the oven becomes hot.
To pierce small hole in the surface of a food, this process is used for several purposes. First, to prevent pastry shell from shrinking and rising. Second, to help any trapped steam between the pastry and the tin or dish to escape during baking. This will stop the pastry base bubbling and lifting away from the tin or dish, which can take up valuable filling space.
Punch out. Yeast and sourdough bread recipes will often tell you to punch down the dough. What does that mean? And how do you do it? More importantly, why do you do it? Punching down the dough releases any gas bubbles that have formed during rising and also redistributes the yeast, sugar, and moisture within the dough. Most yeast bread recipes require 2 stages of rising. Punching down the dough is done after the first rise, and it is a simple but important step. Yeast is a delicate and living thing, and that's why much of bread making is concerned with nurturing the yeast, not killing it, and allowing it to grow. Be firm but gentle and you'll have better loaves in the end. To punch the dough properly, simply firmly but gently push your fist into the center of the dough. Then knead the dough a few times and reform the dough into a ball. Reroll. Reroll means to roll again the pastry or dough. You can do reroll if you have a leftover dough. Just reroll the leftover dough or the dough trimmings and continue to cut out more until it has all been used. This reroll technique is very useful because when you collect all of your pastry scraps and roll them, you may be surprised how much pastry dough is left. In fact, you may have enough to make another biscuit, cookie, pie, and etc. The pastry may not be as flaky if you have re-rolled it, but it will still do the job. What is roll? It is a process which you forming a dough into a shape and to flatten or spread thin by the use of a rolling pin. Individual portions of bread that have been baked into various shapes. There are many different types of dough that can be used for rolls and many different shapes, such as round buns, knotted rolls, rolled wedges, and folded rounds.
The rounding gives the dough pieces
An
tension,
efficient
and this
rolling
tension
technique
holds the
helps to
rolls
ensure
together while
pastry is
baking.
not stretched or overworked, which can cause excessive shrinkage during baking. It also helps to prevent the pastry from warming up during the shaping and lining process, which makes it difficult to handle and can result in greasy pastry.
Next is rollout. It means flattening food, usually a dough or pastry, with a rolling pin. This involves flattening dough with the rolling pin to an even thickness, to be cut into shapes before baking. Dusting the work surface in your rolling pin with flour is an important step. It is a good idea to have a large thin spatula and a roller on hand before you begin. The spatula helps you pick up the dough to keep it from sticking, and the measuring tools help you keep track of the dough's dimensions and thickness as you work. Roll from the center of the dough to the edge, not back and forth, which tends to toughen and dough's gluten. If the dough is soft and sticky, it's helpful to place a layer of plastic wrap between dough and your rolling pin before rolling.
add or change the color of something. You can tint sugar, frosting, and many more. In tinting, frosting is often required when cake decorating and also when decorating cupcakes and cookies. Frosting can be tinted to most any color, either by purchasing special tint colors or by mixing primary colors. Use a paste or gel coloring to minimize the effect on the frosting consistency. The liquid food coloring found in the local food stores can be used, but they will produce lighter colors and will thin the consistency of the frosting, making it harder to work with. Both granulated and powdered sugar can be tinted also in a rainbow of colors. It is an easy way to decorate and adds a special decorative touch to cakes, cupcakes, cookies, and other desserts.
So what does it mean with until done? It means bake until just set, so a properly baked cake is sublime. It's tender, moist, and has a perfect crumb, while an overbaked cake on the other hand can be dry and tough. Or maybe worse, an underbaked cake is gummy and dense. So when can we say that cake is done? There are 5 things to look when deciding if cake is finished baking. Depending on the kind of cake you're making, some of these tests will be more useful than others. So it's important to learn them all. Here's the 5 things to look when your cake is done. First is the edges pull away. Second, the cake smells fragrant. Third, the top turns golden brown. Fourth, the toothpick or paring knife test. And lastly, the cake spring backs. And that's how you test the doneness of the cake.